and welcome to yet another book wrap for the month of July. It was quite a lovely month. I spent a bit of time on leave and exploring both my local area and going on an adventure, which was really lovely. We went down to Brighton and then drove all the way up to Edinburgh, which was quite a drive, and I don't think we'll do that kind of drive again, but you know, the month was lovely. I didn't do a whole lot of reading. I only read 3 books in July, which is a bit below my previous monthly standards. Usually I manage 4, sometimes 5, 6 or 7 if it's been a very, very, very good month. So, you know, despite the fact that July is one of the longer months of the year, I'm just happy with the fact that I had a bit more chilled reading month. One of the books that I read was an audiobook, the other 2 were both on Kindle. All of that was lovely. I've decided that I probably should try keep at least 1 physical book in rotation in the future, which I have at the moment, so we'll see how that happens when I eventually film August's version of this video. Without further ado, let me tell you about the books that I read. So, first up was a book called The Riviera Express by T.P. Fielden, published in 2017. It's subtitled A Miss Dimont Mystery, which I realised after I started is the first in the Miss Dimont mystery series, which is quite nice. I found the book itself it was light, it was easy to read, it was quite a lot of fun, largely set in a beautiful little Devon town that's fictional called Temple Regis. So, seaside village, lots of people enjoying their seaside holidays. It's historically set, so shortly after the war, which is quite nice because it's kind of got lots of social issues to talk, like the men's bowling club and the women's bowling club have disaster that they have to discuss, and the women are just all peeved because they're all stuck making sandwiches but aren't allowed to be full club members and stuff like that, so that's really funny. Miss Judy Dimont is a reporter who works for a paper called the Riviera Express, which is also the name of the local train line which connects Temple Regis to London. It's a murder mystery, so there are 2 bodies that drop and a 3rd person goes missing, and it's suspected for a while that he's also dead. The characterization is lovely. So Miss Dimont's this corkscrew-haired ex-spy, which is kind of woven through that nobody knows what she used to do during the war, and that was because she was a spy. It's got quite a lot of really lovely little vignettes of characters without being too distracted. So one of the bodies that drops is Gerald Hennessy, the star of the silver screen, and there's kind of a big deal between him and his wife and this woman that he's travelled there with, which turns out to be his daughter, not his mistress, and he was killed by caviar in a smoked salmon sandwich, so it's very cutesy and riffing on a lot of the classic detective novel, like the golden age of detective novel tropes, but that makes it really fun to read. I think that I'll probably pick up another few T.P. Fielden books to read on the plane if I go somewhere, or read on the beach, or read on the train, wherever I can read kind of as a relax rather than as, oh, I want to read something character building. Lots of fun. I'd recommend them. Next up was North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, published in 1854. Previously, I'd watched the adaptation that's got Richard Armitage as John Thornton and Daniela Denby-Ashe as Margaret Hale. So I knew the story. It was kind of like, you know, for those of you who haven't read or watched North and South, it's Pride and Prejudice in the Industrial Revolution. So add some Pride and Prejudice and cotton mills. The book tells the story of Margaret Hale and her parents. Her father is a priest in the Church of England, and he has some dissension of conscience and can no longer be a village rector. So he moves his family to Milton, which is Gaskell's analogue for Manchester. it's a big dirty city up north rather than the beautiful, lush southern Helston, which is the village that they come from. It's like, Milton is quite a lot, but not exactly like Manchester, so I've tried to Google exactly where it would be and where Thorntons would live, and it's difficult to find. So it's fictional, but you know, Gaskell herself lived in Manchester for a while, and there's a Gaskell house that you can go visit. I have not yet managed to get there because COVID, but maybe one day. At the core of the book, it's got several themes, one of which is obviously the development of industry and the development of who's in the right and who's in the wrong, particularly for things for very human issues like strikes. The book uses quite a lot of well-written dialect. So, for example, they use the word clemming for starving, and a few other sort of historical dialect from the north phrases. There's also quite a close attention to class, because you've got Margaret, who's, you know, upper class, or well-to-do, upper middle class rather. I don't even know if upper middle class was is a valid distinction at this point in time, but basically she comes from people who look down on trade. So they're the gentry. They are the gentry, thank you very much. Her mother particularly married below her station to this priest who she loved a lot, and then he kept her in a reasonable state in Helston, but now he's taken her to Manchester because he no longer has his parish income. But Margaret is quite antagonistic towards this concept of living around and near people who are in trade. And then you've got Mr. Thornton and his mother, Mrs. Thornton. So Mr. Thornton is a manufacturer. He owns factories, he rents the factories, he owns the means of production, he employs the labourers, and they make cotton. And then the other family that you encounter quite a lot in the novel is the Higgins family, and Nicholas Higgins is a worker in the factory, and his daughter Bess used to be, until she essentially got consumption and dies. But this like really interesting interaction between who is allowed to talk to who and in what way. So Margaret makes friends with the Higginses, much to Mr. Higgins's kind of like, why are you inviting yourself to my house, you strange lady? And then Bess thinks she's lovely, but Margaret's not super keen on being friends with the Thorntons, even though Mr. Thornton is her father's pupil, because that's how he's making his money in this new life that they're living. Yeah, it's quite interesting to think about, like, the challenges that came through, because it's Pride and Prejudice in the Industrial Revolution. There's obviously he is full of pride and she is full of prejudice, or the other way around, and basically it's like disappointed love stories, star-crossed lovers, oh my gosh, finally happy ending, great. Sorry, probably should have said spoiler alert, but it was published in 1850 something, so some things that I really enjoyed in the book were the sumptuousness of the physical detail. So there's a long discussion about finding suitable accommodation in Milton, aka Manchester, and they go into great depth about the tawdry wallpaper and the cornices at the top of the rooms and the furnishings that are just so bright and no one with taste would have furnishings that bright. That was really funny, and obviously also because it's set in Cottonopolis-ish, there's quite a lot of attention to people's clothing, and a really amusing sort of class triangle occurs when Margaret has visited Bessie Higgins and tells her that she's going to dinner at John Thornton's house, going to have dinner with the Tufts, and Bessie, who's like a labourer's daughter, looks her up and down and goes, "Do you have a suitable dress for that? Because like that's not good enough." It was really funny. I read this as an audiobook, which was a lovely experience. I can highly recommend the Audible. I can't remember who narrates it, but well worth it. My third book for the month is The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, published in 2021. We read this for Bookish Broad's. It was a poor theme pick. We all voted for it, so like we all did that, but we were supposed to be reading a sci-fi book. This was not a sci-fi book. It's like historically inspired chick lit kind of thing. So the story is in two timelines. The first timeline, or the main timeline, is an aspiring historian who is called Caroline Pacewell, comes to London on her own on the trip that she and her husband had planned to do together, because she's found out that he had been unfaithful to her. And he kind of like drama around that. She like doesn't want to go do all the exploring that they'd planned and the itinerary that they'd planned, and they were planning to try and get pregnant on this trip, and now she's like, but what if I'm already pregnant and that's my unfaithful husband's child, and Then the other part of the story follows someone called Nella, who's the apothecary in the title, and Eliza Fanning, who's a 12-year-old girl, through loosely the late 1700s, early 1800s. The timekeeping in this book is one of the bits that I really didn't like, so I'll come to that just now. But basically, the present-day story overlaps with the past story because Caroline ends up going mudlarking next to the Thames, which sounds like a lot of fun. Like, you walk out at low tide and you find historical things, sometimes historical, sometimes not historical. And she found a little vial that had the emblem of a bear on it. So she took this to the British libraries, and they found, basically, long story short, they found the connection between this vial and the apothecary. In the apothecary timeline, Nella the apothecary spends a lot of time helping women who have been wronged to off their husbands, brothers, fathers, whichever man in their life has wronged them. So she's kind of got this like, I want to write down these women's names so history remembers how they freed themselves. This happens after she also was wronged. She was impregnated, but then given an abortive account by her lover, who was actually already married at the time. Like, lots of drama. It's quite a cool. I far prefer the historical part of the story to the present day version. Not least because Caroline's husband in the present day comes over and then tries to make the drama all about him, including poisoning himself with eucalyptus oil, which then, you know, the police come through and find in her notebook some notes about the apothecary who'd been poisoning people, so which things could poison, which legal substances could poison, so she gets interrogated by the police, and it's full of drama. Things that I didn't pick up about the book that the girls at book club did, which, you know, were quite funny for me because I'm not English, was they started reading it and then got to the part where she goes into the pub on her first day in London and she orders a Boddington's, and they're all like, this book was written by an American, flip, 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 flip. Oh yes, this book was written by an American. So apparently this is a thing that actual English people don't order Boddingtons in pubs, whereas anyone from America who's trying to make an authentic English feel to their sort of self-insertion novel definitely does the cool. I went into ye olde pub and ordered a Boddingtons, and I found that very funny. And now I've kind of got this sneaky little desire to go into a pub and order a Boddingtons just to find out if it's really bad. That's it. I drink a lot of bad beer because I want to try all the different and interesting ones. So, you know, you got to try them all to find the ones you like, right? I will say I have stopped trying the interesting beer at our local. I just drink the beer I know I like at our local. Anyway, the historical timeline, the sense of the narrative, the structure of it seemed much more compelling to me. This seemed a lot like the kind of book that part of it was written and then part of it was like built around the bits that were written. So like, I think that it could have been quite a good novella if it had just been the historical piece, or a somewhat average chick-litty. Well, the modern day story wouldn't have made sense without the historical one, but the historical one could have stood alone. The challenge there is that the historical timeline doesn't feel reasonable or rational. It feels like the timing is off. So she must have intentionally set it in that time period because it was just before people started being able to test for poisons. But there's nothing about the timeline that makes it feel like it is actually like 1790s or very early 1800s. Like, that was the industrial timeline, and kind of the apothecary side of things makes it feel a little bit like it's like it should have been like early 1700s or maybe even late 1600s instead of late 1700s, early 1800s. So like the historical characterization of the period feels off to me, and I don't know if that's just because I've consumed quite a lot of literature from that era. Yeah, it just feels off. That's how it goes. Would I read it? Would I recommend it? Yeah, it's a chicklet. It's fine. It's fun to read. I'd say, yeah, no, if you see it at a secondhand shop, give it a try. I do wish there'd been a little bit more of the historical narrative, because that was great, and I would have liked more of the early assassinations / murders planned by Nella the Apothecary. I found that bit quite cool, and it's a bit of sort of, the book club debated whether or not it was magical realism that she seems to have some sort of severe arthritis or developing bodily issue that, you know, is this punishment for her actions, or is this as a result of what was done to her, or is this just an illness that happens to coincide with all the things that she's done. So quite a lot of interesting things to think about, particularly in the previous timeline. So since then I also have picked up one of the books that was also on the shortlist. So this month's wrap-up video for August will feature The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal, which has been one of the best books I've read all year. But yeah, I think that we could have done better to choose a sci-fi book in Sci-Fi Month, and that's fine. You live and you learn. Apparently this is a thing that happens quite often in the book club, so I'm glad it wasn't just this one-off that I was like, but this is not a sci-fi book. Yeah. That was 3 pretty good books, one of which was meaningful and had a lot of substance, one of which was very enjoyable murder mystery, and one of which was probably not my favourite book this month, but also not the worst book I've read this year. So, you know, I will be back, hopefully earlier than mid-month next month, with another book wrap, and until then, have a good time and stay safe.